My name is Roger Guyett. I'm a visual effects supervisor, and I work for a company called Industrial Light and Magic in San Francisco, California. And I've worked there for 22 years, I believe. I was lucky enough to be the visual effects supervisor and the second unit director on Star Wars: The Force Awakens. That process of trying to find the right direction for the film, and obviously I don't mean director as in J.J. Abrams, I just mean the sort of the quality of the movie in the sense of what we were trying to achieve, the kind of the visual look of the movie and all those things. I mean, it's a really complicated problem. You're trying to understand the fans and sort of a nostalgic association with the earlier movies. You're trying to recapture all of that sort of excitement and emotion. You know, you don't want to just create a sort of retrospective piece. You just want to create something with its own new energy. And of course, there are just thousands of decisions that go into making that from, and I think you just have to consider each one of those and respect the you know, things that have happened in the past, and I mean obviously the decisions that were made on the earliest movies, and I'm trying to understand why they made those choices and what, how to set this thing on the right course. And that's it's a very complicated thing to do. And right at the end there, you know, I still remember JJ said to me, "It's amazing," you know, after we'd shown the movie and people were responding so well to it, and you know, I still remember him saying, you know, that's just amazing. It's kind of like threading this crazy needle over this period of time, because there are so many choices you have to make, and each one of those does have an effect. It's not like, it's funny, it sort of reminded me of, you know, when people talk about voting in an election, you know, that every vote counts, you know, there's thousands of people, and yes, those individual votes maybe at the end of the day don't make a difference, but they do. The reality is it does, because it all adds up. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that weird thing where you realize you just made all of those decisions, and all of those smaller decisions turn into this much bigger thing, if that makes any sense. I mean, there's a point where it just turns into a practical issue of trying to schedule the work in the period of time that you have to do all of those bits, and the one thing that I really wanted to do was make sure that we, wherever possible, I mean, the issue, you know, if you're on location, you are, you know, you're at the mercy of the weather. You know, you're at the mercy of the time of year. When we tried to go to Iceland initially, you know, suddenly they had a thaw on, and it was just like, okay, we just got to move. And those sorts of things are just really practical problems. I mean, I think everyone was really invested in the process of making what we thought were the right choices for the movie, what sets to build, and all of those sorts of things. And there is a point in there where there's an economic moment where you have to figure out the cost of all of that, the shooting time involved, and sometimes make compromises about certain locations. You know, for the desert, we were originally going to be in Jordan. That became more impractical to us because we needed to, anyway, but it turned into the Arab Emirates. And those are just practical decisions that you have to make on any movie. You're making choices based around some of those things as they present themselves to you. And you know, it was really the idea of the scheduling was hard. You know, the scheduling of the movie was very, very hard. And that actually became considerably harder when, unfortunately, you know, Harrison Ford had his injury, you know. I mean, I think, obviously, the first thing you want to do is have a script that you feel is robust enough and is the right movie, you know, the right idea that you're shooting. Because more often than not, the problems of the individual sequences become what's the word, you know, reduced if the story you're telling is the right story. In other words, if you're on the right general path, the smaller problems of some of the shot design of each individual moments, or making it exciting enough or whatever, are smaller problems to solve. And so, you know, we were delayed. I mean, I don't think it's any, you know, everybody knows that, you know, we were going to really start shooting that movie in the autumn, winter of 2013 or whatever the original plan was, and we didn't end up shooting until the beginning of 2014. And so we were under a certain amount of time pressure, and that certainly affected the amount of prep that we had. But the one thing that we really had in our favor is we generally worked together before. And that shorthand was amazingly helpful and efficient in the way that we interacted with one another. You know, JJ and Dan Mendel, the DP, and Tommy Harper, the producer, and Gormley, Tommy Gormley, the AD, and all these guys. We were Colin, Anderson. We'd all worked together for years. We knew each other. So when we talked about things, we had similar points of reference, and we had our own history together. We could talk about things that we felt worked well. We could talk about things that we didn't think worked very well. That was an incredible shorthand between us, and it creates a tremendous level of trust as well. The other thing that I think has happened over JJ's career, he is way more spontaneous. He has the confidence to be way more spontaneous, and I mean that in a positive way of not. Once he's got the scene staged, he can be more improvisational in the way that he shoots it, because he's a very confident shot maker, and he sometimes finds the process of pre-vis a little frustrating, because what you're staging is actually not the real event, and so that thing inherits this energy that somehow the pre-vis had, and it doesn't quite go in this other direction that he might want to take it in. So it's a double-edged sword, pre-vis, because it's sort of that weird thing where you might end up at the edge of the Grand Canyon, and people are convincing you should be shooting towards the car park. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But if you just turn around, there's this great thing happening over here. And that kind of level of spontaneity is really something that he really embraces. But the truth is, we worked on some of the action sequences more as sketches, and some of them were more predefined. We had more time on the Falcon chase. And of course, post-vis is an amazing tool where you can really, having been to a place, and there's the great advantage of a little hindsight of having been to some of those locations and said, actually, there's another idea here, or maybe we're going to do X or Y. And those things we could do because often they were the visual effects parts. Well, I mean, in some ways, the thing that obviously it's hard when you're driving, you're involved in a production that's driving along, is to obviously sometimes take the time to maybe shoot in a different direction or find a different point on the set, but most of what I was aiming for was, if at least we can get to that first place where if we're outside, we're really shooting outside, then there's an honesty to that. Sometimes, nature doesn't necessarily let it be the most beautiful shot, but there was an inherent honesty to that. And I felt that that was a quality that I wanted to have for the movie. So if we did something that JJ doesn't like to do, doesn't like all the fancy gimbals and all that sort of thing. We did that on this movie because we really felt it was worth doing, and it was worth spending the time, and it really paid off. When you watched Daisy fly the Millennium Falcon, you saw shadows chasing across that. They're real shadows a lot of the time. So that was really the foundation of that approach and that kind of work. But I always say, and you've obviously clearly you've actually heard me say it, haven't you? You've listened to me, is just this whole notion of, that's the foundation, that's what you start with, and in many ways that's the basic building block of every shot, is the composition and the way you're lighting it. And if we could get it in the right kind of environment, I was convinced there would be that honesty. And then the next step was trying to make it look as cool as possible with the options that you had. Having a consistent kind of feel to it all was a way bigger. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to sort of control, because there are just so many people working on the movie, that there are so many steps to it, and I just mean that in the sense of the consistency of the look, or the consistency of the feel about the way that everything was happening. It's such it's clearly a huge body of work, and obviously there are so many people involved in all of that, but I had one thing is we had a great team of people. I had a great group of people working on it. I'd worked with a lot of them before, so some of the things that may have created problems on on shows, I just didn't have those issues. Pat Tuback is somebody that, you've probably spoken to him before, and he just did an amazing job. We had Mike Mulholland in London. I mean, these are super experienced people. Paul Kavanagh, who's the animation supervisor. I mean, these are guys that, Paul and I go way back to, in my 3, we've worked together so much. So that was a really big asset on the show, was just the fact that on the production side, we'd all work together, but a lot of the guys that ended up working on that show were core parts of the team on the Star Trek movies and stuff like that. So I knew them very well, and and they understood, I think, some of just the basic kind of ideas that I was going for on the movie. And I don't mean that they were basic ideas in the sense of their complexity, but just more in terms of these are the kind of the general rules for what I'm trying to achieve within the scope of the show. And a lot of hard work. I mean, that's the truth. Well, there's a lot of work that does happen that way, and there are other things where you just have to make sure that you have nailed the technical. There's a shot in the movie in Star Wars where it's basically 3 different shots that are all cut together, and they're sort of hopefully seamlessly blended, and in achieving that we had to, but we didn't want to use motion control, so we had a Steadicam operator who rehearsed the end of one move so that he could carry it into the beginning of the next shot, and those kinds of things you have to just get, just try and get them technically correct as best you can, and it's worth it because trying to fix that problem is a much bigger challenge. It's hard to go back from that. So I think visual effects generally are pretty unobtrusive on the set, generally. But the truth is, if you want to get a great green screen extraction or something like that, the chances are you're going to have to spend a few minutes trying to light that green screen. If you want to get the best mocap data, the chances are you're going to have to make sure that there's some kind of integrity to the system you're using. So there's lots of things in there that you want to know are correct. But when I talk to my, the guys that are working on the show with me, I don't talk necessarily in terms of what technology is available to us and whether something is easy or hard. Yeah. You talk about what it is that you want the shot to be, and then try and figure out the most efficient way of getting to that place. And I think that's sometimes the issue, is people get so bogged down with the idea that there's some piece of technology that they want to use or that they thought was right for the job, and then, the truth is, what is the end result? Because at the end of the day, no one cares, I think, or maybe a very small percentage of people are looking at the shots going, I wonder how they did that. Because if people are doing that, the chances are, you've somehow given yourself away, or maybe they're not just watching the movie. If they say, I wonder how they did that because it's so cool, that's great, mind you. But what I'm really saying is, if they have time to sort of register the mechanics of it all, then obviously that may not be completely successful. View is such a great conference, and it's done in, it has a sort of, you see a lot of the old faces, the people that run it, Mary and Eleanor, and all the people that are involved with it are so kind, and, there's a great mixture of people that come here, and it's, you're in Turin. It's a fantastic setting. You get to enjoy the city, and at the same time, meet old friends and see new, hear about new exciting ideas in the business. And obviously a lot of the people that come are students, and they're incredibly enthusiastic about the work and hearing you talk about whatever it is you've done. So yeah, I always have a very warm feeling about View.